Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Pública. In the episode of today, we talk about the concept of human nature and the different political theories that have been created among this concept, which can be ambiguous. For example, Hannah Arendt mentioned how for her it is more important to try to understand the human condition, which is how the external aspect of the world have influenced our upbringing rather than human nature, which according to her is almost impossible to realize what the human nature is, because as soon as we are born we are influenced about everything. So in this episode I will examine the challenge that a political theory such as Phillips conveys to humanism as a political theory, and how she offers a different perspective beyond the anthropocentric view. And for this, it will be supported by Hannah Arendt thought. So just to start, I will say that the concept of human nature has been widely debated due to the challenge of analyzing separately the inherent characteristics of humans, if they exist as such, and how they have been conditioned by their environment. When Ralph Waldo Emerson expressed in his book Nature in 1836 that, quote, "I am nothing, I see all," end quote, the implicit message was that in order to face their surroundings through an impartial view, the humans should either forget everything that they had already learned or desist on following humanism as a theory which overlooks external factors beyond humans. If human nature refers to the essential character of all human beings, it does not seem surprising that some political writers had refused to spend much time trying to focus in this seemingly unsolvable riddle. As I mentioned earlier, that is the case of Hannah Arendt, who in her famous book The Human Condition merely portrayed a few ideas about the human nature. She assumed the almost utopian aim to discover the human nature when she indicated that, likewise, the task of to find the nature of God, the human nature, quote, can be settled only within the framework of a divinely revealed answer, end quote. In other words, because human beings are conditioned by a range of internal and external factors, the only manner to comprehend their nature could be through God. Similarly, Anne Phillips mentioned in The Politics of the Human that, quote, "The natural in human nature is almost impossible to identify, if by natural we mean existing outside social relation," end quote. Both ideas show some reminiscence of the dialectical materialism, but the fundamental contribution of Phillips is the idea that despite the humans are not the only protagonists of the world, they still must undertake the responsibility towards that ultimate aim, which for her consists on reaching global equality. But for both Arendt and Phillips, and also to Ralph Waldo Emerson, the idea to try to understand human nature is utopian, because as soon as we are born in a specific place, we are influenced by our family, the culture in which we are being raised. We are growing and we go to a determined school, we have a different group of friends, living in a sphere, in a particular community will certainly influence how we develop towards the world. In that sense, human nature is hard to attest. And in following episode, when I focus about human condition, the book of Hannah Arendt, is interesting how she puts the examples of how the humans, in order to go to the outer space, they had to create the perfect conditions to be able to breathe, like in the space, in the moon, and so on. In that sense, human nature could not just survive in that part outside the earth. And obviously this is kind of one of the most exaggerated examples about the human condition, but also if we think how we live in our daily life, like we cook in our kitchen, we may go across the city through the bus, or we get warm during the night by our hearth in our house, or the heater. Those kind of invents are part of the condition that the humans have invented through the years, but that were not there thousands of years ago. So it is difficult to believe that humans have evolved that quick in barely hundreds of years when those kind of new inventions have been created. So Since science won the hegemonical battle against the church, the collapse of the latter created a new trend of thought elaborate around the human. Whereas before the God was the most important, there is a time after the Enlightenment in which there is more emphasis to the importance of the human being, the capacity of everybody to use their own reason to progress toward another aim, the importance of the logic and the capacity of every person to believe what they want to do and to pursue their own interest. Yuval Noah Harari has mentioned in his books and in his conference how science is showing nowadays that the idea of humanism should be changed, or to say the least adapt to the new currents of inventions, because all our kind of decisions are taking not but what we wish, but how the different chemistry in our brains are working as a kind of result of the external environment, and also about thousands of years of evolution. So in that sense, Yuval Noah Harari believes that in the near future the artificial intelligence will be able to take the best decision for us than ourselves, because they will be able to look at our data and analyze which kind of decision will be better in every determinate moment. But going back to that time, it is obvious that when the church is, the ideology of the church is crushed, and as Nietzsche said, God is dead, the humans are left alone in the universe, and henceforth we are those who are taking responsibility for our actions. The fear of freedom, as Eric Fromm puts in his book. So, with the introduction of the Enlightenment philosophy and later the theory of natural selection elaborated by Charles Darwin in On the Origin of Species, a new perception of humanity was gradually being conformed. However, the crimes committed over the world in the name of human progress by a supposedly superior race raised the skepticism among a great number of thinkers. In other words, the ideas of colonialism, which were legitimized through a series of books, of writing documents in which it was said that the white race, the white people, the concept of race was widely used at that time, was superior, and henceforth they deserved to establish a dominion over the world. The French Empire, the English Empire, they were using those ideas in order to normalize their exploitation over the world and be able to pursue their interests that were based on expanding their empire, amass a great amount of richness, while at the same time the deeds of those wars were based upon the blood of the slave. Henceforth, after the Second World War and with the creation of the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights, which was formulated in 1948, signified the start of a new era in which the concept of equality between human beings would allegedly impede another outbreak of atrocities. We have seen that this has not happened. It is true that in Europe there wasn't a great war until 1992 in Yugoslavia, but also now we have the war in Ukraine, but all over the world since 1945 we have the Algerian War of Independence, the war in Vietnam, the war in Indochina, the war in Yemen that is being fought today, war in Ethiopia, and in many other places. But it's true that this rhetoric of human rights, which was a concept developed by H.G. Wells, the English writer, who I think it was in 1944 or 43, he proposed this idea of the human rights, to create a new kind of idea to try to group all the people over the world. But as inequality still persists across the planet, Phillips decided to elaborate a theory based on the human responsibility to acknowledge both its importance in the planet and at the same time to distance itself from the human narcissist approach, which had served to legitimize immoral actions during the last century, as I mentioned earlier. especially when the idea of human was far from including anybody aside the white male rich members of the different countries. For Phillips, the idea of inequality is rather political than natural, and hence the need of a political theory of human nature must evade the common liberal view of dismissing the differences. What does he mean when he says that the idea of inequality is rather political than natural? He mentions that even though it was new that people from different countries, different cultures were not different in the genetic sense, still they elaborate different kind of constitutions in order to give more importance to a particular class. This is not only seen in the colonies but also in the United States after the independence from Great Britain, how they create a constitution in which will give the right to vote just a part of the population, with the excuse that they were the most clever and wanted to avoid that the mass could vote. And we can see that how this was imposed on the women, how they were forced to be at home, and so on. So this idea of inequality was based on a political ideology that was portrayed by the different governments all over the world. It is important, this kind of political idea, because even in some progressive societies like the French Revolution, you see people of like Robespierre and Saint-Just who mention how the people in Paris is speaking in the name of the whole country in order to attain their interest to unite against the monarchy. It is important because political ideas are always an imaginary, same as nationalism and other myths that serve to create cohesion among different societies. And in that sense, and Phillips mentioned the importance of creating a political theory of human nature in which there will be more inclusion to the different group of societies, such as women, black people, LGBTQ plus communities, or different ethnic minorities. So, this new political theory, it must not try to group all the humans within a sphere of uniqueness. Instead, the political theory to guarantee equality must be one which embraces diversity and moreover recognizes the own importance of animals and materials. In other words, equality doesn't mean that all have to be the same, wish for the same things, create a kind of general will. But rather it means that even though we are different, this doesn't mean that some must have to be on top of the others. Rather, we need to learn about each other, the different cultures, religions, the different customs, in order to have a society progressing towards a better goal. That sense, I think London is a good example because you can see how there are churches from different religions. You have the mosques, you have Muslims, Christians, Orthodox, Protestants, you have Jewish, and many other religions, Buddhists, living together, people from different cultures in the society. The theory of distributive agency does not mean that humans should reject their own responsibilities with the planet, as their retreat from the public sphere have already had detrimental consequences. This means the depoliticization that have occurred in the last decades. According to Arendt, it is precisely humans' abdication of their political responsibility that triggered the emergence of totalitarianism during the 20th century. So this is not a common an aspect just that happened in the 21st century and at the end of the 20s, but also during the time in which capitalism had been imposed as the main ideology at the end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, in which societies, at least the so-called First World War, they were expanding across the different countries. You have the scramble of Africa, United States, Great Britain, and France. They were growing. You have the new state founded of Germany. the new state of Italy, which the north was becoming very industrialized, and in that sense, people believe that political parties were not that important. So you have this contradiction, which, I mean, it's in a contradiction nowadays, where you have liberalism in those kind of regions, but there was no democracy. And precisely Carl Schmitt, which was the ideologist of Nazism, believed that democracy and liberalism could not be held together, because liberal means the individualism of people to pursue their own interests, to create business and don't care too much about the others, whereas democracy, it should be the opposite, like giving all the people the same means in order to be part of the society. So he saw liberal democracy as anachronism. Then, going back to Hannah Arendt, as she exposed in her book The Origins of Totalitarianism, one of the reasons which provoked an almost incomparable catastrophe in the 20th century was the refusal of humans to act together in the political domain. Thus, in her book The Human Condition, she remarked the importance of action and human plurality to evaluate the society, because, quote, men and not man live on the earth and inhabit the world, end quote. So he mentioned how people in plural and not in singular must inhabit the planet, and they need to reach a kind of consensus in order to create different societies to be able to live in all of them. Arendt definite assertion that human nature, quote, does not exist, end quote, served her to draw a line between human nature and human condition. And it is the latter aspect which she examined at length in her book, which is precisely named as that, Human Condition. Both Arendt and Phillips underline the relevance of the human as a plural entity to progress. Although Arendt wrote that her aim was not to offer a solution to the world problems, but, quote, to think what we are doing, end quote, she implicitly offered the path to be pursued, which is the necessity to cooperate. Meanwhile, Phillips proclaimed that in order to reach equality, the human beings must elaborate a theory focused on including everybody. This is one of her main concerns, and because of that, she underscores in her book The Politics of the Human how the concept of the human, quote, has been deployed historically to draw a line and keeps other out, end quote. As I mentioned earlier, this idea to establish a system in which a minority of the population will have all the benefits, all the richness, and will benefit upon the work of the different members of society. So the upper strata will mean that those people on top of the pyramid will receive the better things in society. Something that is still happening today. There was recently an Oxfam report about how inequality has been growing in the last year, and the statistics are absolutely incredible. There was something like how since 2019 the 1% of the population has attained the 65% of the richness, how since 2011 inequality has been growing, and this is incredible if we think how we are being told all the time that the inflation prices, the rising commodities and so on are the fault of the COVID and the war in Ukraine. However, simultaneously, the richest company, the richest people are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. For that reason, Anne Phillips emphasized the political aspect that the human nature as a cornerstone to achieve equal rights. Otherwise, people may only decide to collaborate with those who they consider similar to them and consequently reject diversity. Because for her, if being human is all that matters, a political theory of humans must eliminate the cause of political inequalities, including some subtler aspects like the indirect coercion faced by minorities when they participate in the public sphere. It is not that you have to give people freedom to debate, to act in the public sphere, to engage with others, but also this kind of indirect coercion which may stop these people to get involved. You can see that in the geographical disposition of some cities. Like if you create a big park in the center of the city next to the beautiful areas in which all the most well-equipped people live, even though this park is free for everybody, the people who are living in the suburbs won't be able to go there, or they can go but they need to travel 1 hour and so on. So at the end you will have a place of segregation in which only the people who live close to that park can go there. This happened in Paris because it's a city built around the center in kind of circles, and you see how the suburbs are in the other part of the city. In other cities like London, the distribution is more equal. You have many parks across the area, not just in central London, but also in the north, like Hampstead Heath. In the east, like Victoria Park. You have in the south, like Stockley Park, or in the west, you have obviously Hyde Park, Regent's Park, which is also part of the north, and so on. So in that areas, even though you may not live in the richest neighborhood, you will have access to those parks. And it's important to create this kind of cohesion and to let people participate in the different aspects of the city. But the white male hegemonical discourse may continue to exclude groups such as women or black people, as Nancy Fraser depicts in her book Rethinking the Public Sphere. To sum up and finish the episode, some conclusions. First, a political theory of the human must recognize moral claims, cultural differences, and embrace plurality. Henceforth, Phillips called upon the privileged people to help those with less resources. This is something also explained by Peter Singer in his book about ethic and redistribution, in which he explains that the richest people should be able to provide some means to the poorer. He also wrote Animal Liberation, which I published an episode some weeks ago, in which we need to stop to eat meat and also kill animals for our own benefit, like for clothes, to feed ourselves, and so on. Considering that those living in rich countries are normally in better disposition to acquire books, the political theory of the human shall be elaborated to persuade them of their paramount role to accomplish this commitment. And this is what happened with the book, for example, of Peter Singer about morality. In addition, Phillips indicates that the people living under worse conditions must dare to claim equality, because it's in their demands where the real radicalism of politics of the human lies, as she puts it. However, here there is a problem, which other writers exposes in their writings, such as what happens if a person cannot talk because have some kind of a impediment for do that, or a baby. Does a baby have rights? I think so, but they cannot demand anything. Same as the old people, or as I mentioned, people with some difficulties to speak or to claim equality. In addition, the animals, even though they cannot cooperate in the public sphere to draw a constitution, to create a declaration of the animal rights, for example, or so on, there are people that suffer. They are sentient beings, and in my opinion, all the sentient beings should have rights. So, as Phillips and Arendt mentioned, it is important to establish a political theory which is based among the conditions in that we are living. And I will finish here. In the next episode, I will focus mostly on Hannah Arendt and her book, The Human Condition, which I think is fundamental to understand her thoughts. She wrote that one, I think it was 1960, in the context of the Cold War, and she precisely points to the satellite Sputnik that the Soviet Union sent to outer space. Also, the importance of the human actions, how everybody could create something new in the world, and for that reason it is important to give the better conditions to everybody to pursue their ends and to favor society within these aims.